Good morning, everyone. If I remember, Rich was rather persuasive when asking me whether or not I wanted to be a, quote, in fact, I think my arm is still hurting from the twisting. But no, I was a newbie. I was a little skittish about it, but took on the challenge. And the first person I thought of was my good friend Vin, who was a college classmate of mine. And that was as I walked out of the church, I said a little prayer that Vin would be available on that day. But I'm grateful to be here. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yep. I met Vin in 1968 when we were both freshmen at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. And then I think from the very get-go, we met in the alumni dorm that we were staying in, and I was having trouble getting into my room, and he helped me get into the room. And that was the start of him helping me out throughout the next 4 years with computer programming, accounting, you name it. And to this day, he still helps me out when I've got issues. But let me tell you more about Vin, other than the fact that he's a tremendously good friend, as well as his wife, Margie. And Vin, by the way, is here from Northborough, Massachusetts, so he made a good trek to come down and visit with us today. Vin, as I said, is a graduate of Holy Cross as well, math major, and he worked for 40 years in the computer science software industry, starting with a career at Data General. And then he worked for a number of startup software operations as well, vice president at Stratus and Cisco, and vice president of software development at Netezza Corporation and at Concentric Data Systems. Vin is a lifelong sports fan, and he says he spent many hours listening to games on the radio, watching TV while growing up in Connecticut. Vin is originally from Meriden, Connecticut. And Vin, to put it mildly, has an excellent memory, and I've always joked that he is essentially my memory as well. He will tell me things that I did, either with him or without him, that I don't remember doing. And we often call upon Vin when we have a sports question in particular. Vin has written 3 books. He is the author of The Possible Dream, which describes the reasons why the Red Sox had not won a World Series for so many years, and then they finally won in 2004, much to my dismay as a Yankee fan, but our friendship maintained that. He wrote Patriot Pride, which is a 50-year history of the New England Patriots. Vin is an avid fan of the Patriots. And he wrote the book, and they're in the back if you want to take a look at them, the book Comeback, which describes the Patriots season where they had all sorts of difficulties and come-from-behind wins, including Deflategate, which you may remember when Tom Brady was accused of deflating the football. But somehow that didn't stop them from winning the Super Bowl. Vin is a father of 3 children and grandfather of 2. He is a tremendous friend, and just FYI, he is also a member of an organization similar to ours. It's called the Dull Men's Club in Northborough, Massachusetts. And I assured Vin that he would find no duller men than the old guard of New Jersey. So he'll feel right at home. Vin, and last but not least, Vin and his wife Margie are 6-time champions of the Northborough Education Foundation Trivia Challenge, which raises money for the Northborough school system. So it is a great privilege to introduce my tremendously good friend, Vin Femia, who will enlighten us about the somewhat sketchy history of the Giants and the Jets, and probably the wonderful history of the Patriots. So those of you who are not New England fans, you'll have to put up with that. Vin, please come on up.
So this talk, as you can see, is about, hang on a second. I call it Football Success, Failure, Craziness, and Fun, and it talks about the Giants, the Jets, and the Patriots. And if you've been fans of any of these teams, you know that they've got lots of good memories, and they have lots of things that just make you scratch your heads and say, really? So we'll see some of them here. So as I said, we'll talk about the brief history, I hope, of these 3 teams. And we'll also, Tom asked me to talk about some of the experiences that I had interviewing former players and coaches of the New England Patriots. And there's some, I think, interesting stories there that you will like. So let's start with the oldest of these teams, the Giants. The Giants were founded in 1925, so 100 years ago. Tim Mara was the original owner, and he paid $500 for his franchise in the National Football League. It was named after the baseball team. It was incorporated in 1937 as the New York Football Giants. And many of you can probably remember and picture Howard Cosell calling them the New York Football Giants. It's not my best impression. They played in the Polo Grounds. They played in Yankee Stadium. They played in the New Haven Yale Bowl for a couple of years, Shea Stadium, and they moved to the Meadowlands in 1976. The team has 8 overall NFL championships, which is third most of all time. The only teams with more championships are the Green Bay Packers with 13 and the Chicago Bears with 9. So it's a great history that the Giants have had. And you can see some of the top players there. They won 4 of those, first of all, they won 4 of those championships before there was a Super Bowl and 4 afterwards. And you see Sam Huff, Y.A. Tittle, Frank Gifford, and Lawrence Taylor. So they got their first championship in 1927. They had a record of 11-1-1, but there was no championship game. They were just declared the champions of the league. Then they beat the Bears in they lost to the Bears in 1933, 23-21, but then they got their revenge in 1934 in the famous sneaker game, if any of you remember reading about this. The Bears had come in undefeated. This is a recurring theme. The Giants beat undefeated teams in championship games, much to my dismay. And it was freezing rain, and people were slipping all over the field in the first half. And the Giants at halftime went in and changed their cleats to sneakers that they had gotten from Manhattan College and wound up winning the game and becoming champions. They also beat the Packers in 1938 and 1956. They beat the Bears 47-7 in Yankee Stadium. Now, lots of good memories, but then in the late 50s and early 60s, things did not quite go quite as well for the Giants. They had a few near misses, the most famous of which was the game many refer to as the greatest game of all time, the 1958 championship game with the Baltimore Colts in Yankee Stadium. This is the game that was the first ever overtime game in pro football history. Johnny Unitas led the team, the Colts, down the field to tie the game just before time expired. And from what I've read, the players were just sort of milling around thinking, what happens now? We're tied. It's 17-17. Are we co-champions? But Bert Bell, who was a commissioner at the time, had instituted the overtime rule. And so they realized that they had to play in overtime, and the first team to score wins. And sadly for the Giants, Johnny Unitas led the Baltimore Colts down the field. And there's the famous picture that you see here of Alan Amici running it in for the touchdown that won that 1958 championship, 23-17 for the Colts. Now we're getting into the era that I remember a little bit more. They lost to Baltimore again in 1959. They lost to Green Bay in Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1961, 37-0. Paul Hornung scored 19 points in that game. Then the next year they played Green Bay again in Yankee Stadium. It was a very, very cold day. Tom was at the game, as I remember. And I remember him telling me years later that for a while after the game, he couldn't even feel his feet because it was so cold at the game. But they lost that one 16-7, and then lost in Chicago to the Bears in 1963, 14-10. So let's get into some of the low points of Giants history. They have fewer than the Jets and far fewer than the Patriots, by the way. But in the late 1950s, they had a coach, Jim Lee Howell, who had 2 assistants who became very famous, Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry. Lombardi coached the offense, Landry coached the defense. And Lombardi expected to be named the head coach of the Giants, but the Giants instead picked, do you guys remember? Allie Sherman as their head coach. So Lombardi went on to Green Bay, won 5 championships with Green Bay. Tom Landry went on to Dallas, won 2 championships with Dallas. And Allie Sherman coached the Giants. You may remember that Y.A. Tittle, who was a great quarterback for the Giants, was really battered by the Bears in that championship game in 1963, came back in 1964, was battered by, if I remember correctly, and I do, the Philadelphia Eagles in the first game and the Steelers in the second game. And this is a picture of him, and there's just blood streaming down his bald head. Then maybe the lowest point in Giants history was the miracle in the Meadowlands in 1978. They were winning the game late against the Philadelphia Eagles, and instead of taking a knee, I can see some of you remember this, Joe Pisarcik tried to hand it off to Larry Zonka, who hardly ever fumbled, but he hit his arm, the ball was fumbled, Herm Edwards picked up the ball and ran it in, and the Eagles won. So if that's the worst thing in your history, wait till we get to the Jets and the Patriots. Okay, they were nearly shut out in the first Super Bowl that they were in 2001. They lost to the Baltimore Ravens, and their only touchdown was on a kickoff return. Okay, but then their fortunes reversed in 1983 when they hired Bill Parcells as head coach, and Parcells brought in Bill Belichick as an assistant, and really the Giants took off, and they got glory after that. I remember reading that after they lost to the Bears in the 1985 playoffs, Parcells was flying home with his friend Mickey, and I can't remember Mickey's last name now, and Parcells was just shaking his head and saying, "That's a really good team." And his friend turned to him and said, "Yep, and you got to find a way to beat them." So Parcells built up the team, and the very next year, they went on and won the Super Bowl. And along the way, they beat the San Francisco 49ers, who had been the best team of the 1980s, 49-3, holding Joe Montana and his team without a touchdown. Then they played at home against the Washington Redskins for the NFC Championship. And this game was very windy. If you guys have ever been to the Meadowlands, I have not, but it can be very windy and cold. And it was so windy that when the Giants won the toss, Parcells had them pick which field they were going to defend instead of taking the ball, which was the norm at that time. So because of that, the Giants scored 17 first half points, held on to that lead, nobody else scored, and they won the game and went on to that Super Bowl, which they won, beating the Denver Broncos and John Elway 39-20. Phil Simms was the MVP. He had a great game. He threw 25 times. He completed 22 passes. It was the best record in Super Bowl history till Tom Brady in 2007. And the Giants held Elway and Denver to 20 points. Then they won again in the 1990 season, 1991 Super Bowl. They faced the Buffalo Bills with their high-powered offense with Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas. And they beat Buffalo beat Miami 44-34, and the Raiders 51-3. So they scored 95 points in 2 playoff games. Then they went to the Super Bowl, and the Giants held them to 19 points and were able to win the game when Buffalo kicker Scott Norwood tried a field goal at the end, very last play of the game, and it went wide right, which, if any of you are Buffalo Bills fans, is the story of Buffalo Bills history. Wide right. They did it again in the playoffs against Kansas City a couple of years ago. And the interesting thing about this is Bill Belichick, who was known as a defensive genius, had a game plan that day that was so good it's been praised by other defensive experts, and that defensive game plan was actually placed in the NFL Hall of Fame. I think the plan was, we're going to stop Thurman Thomas, and if we're going to lose, it's going to be Jim Kelly beating us. But the Giants stopped Thomas, bottled up Kelly, and won the Super Bowl. All right, I'd rather not talk about this, but I've got to talk about this. In 2007, the Patriots had an undefeated season. They were 16-0, and they were dominating the game and every team that they were playing. They made it 18-0 with playoff wins over Jacksonville and San Diego. The Giants just barely got in as a wild card, and they beat Tampa Bay, Dallas, and in overtime beat Green Bay. So then they got to the Super Bowl. By the way, they were the one team I did not want the Patriots to face in the Super Bowl, because I thought with their defense and with, no offense, the New York hype, they'd be sky high for the game, and they were. So they held the high-powered, this is another recurring thing, they held the high-powered Patriot offense to just 17 points, and in fact had the lead late when Tom Brady led a touchdown drive that gave the Patriots the lead with 2:43 to go in the game. One defensive stop by the Patriots would have won the Super Bowl and completed a full undefeated season. But the Giants got the kickoff and drove to the winning touchdown, thanks in large part to the helmet catch when Eli Manning eluded the rush through a long pass that David Tyree caught by just sort of pinning the football to his helmet. And Rodney Harrison, who you see trying to tackle him there, couldn't knock it out. And so then late in the game, there was this pass to Plexico Burress that gave the Giants the 17-14 lead. And the Giants held the Patriots to 4 and out and won the Super Bowl. And no, I will never get over it. Not only will I never get over it, but they had a rematch in 2011. The Giants came in as the number 4 seed, beat Atlanta, Green Bay, and San Francisco, and the Patriots were the number 1 seed in the AFC, but the Giants won that Super Bowl too. Once again, Brady led a comeback, gave the Patriots a 17-15 lead. One defensive stand would give the Patriots another Super Bowl win, but they couldn't do it. The Giants drove 88 yards for a touchdown with a touchdown run by Ahmad Bradshaw right here with 57 seconds to go. And if you remember the game, Bradshaw was running, he was wide open, and he tried to fall and not go into the end zone, so the Giants could either score on the last play of the game or kick a field goal to win it. But I guess you could see the momentum of his rear end, fell into the end zone, he scored a touchdown, and the Giants won the game. Okay, let's now start to get a little crazier and talk about the New York Jets. So the Jets actually were one of the original, if you know all this, I apologize for repeating it to you, but they were one of the original 8 teams in the American Football League that was started by 2 Texas oil billionaires, H.R. Hunt and what's the other guy's name? Okay, and the other guy. We'll get to it with the Patriots. Who tried to join the National Football League. They wanted expansion teams in Houston and Dallas, and the National Football League said no. So these guys are Texas oil billionaires. They don't take no for an answer. They decided to start their own league. And so they found 6 other owners to join the league, one of whom was Harry Wismer, who joined the league owning the New York Titans, as it was called. So the Titans played their first few seasons in the Polo Grounds, which by then was really starting to decay. Their first coach was Sammy Baugh, who had been a great quarterback for the Washington Redskins. I think he was known as Slinging Sammy Baugh. But Wismer, well, to be honest, was a cheapskate. For example, when the players were at practice in 1961, all of a sudden they saw the coaches leaving, and the coaches leaving practice, and they didn't know what was happening. Then they went to the bank to cash their checks, and they found that the Titans did not have enough money in the bank to cover all the checks. So the next week, when the coaches started to leave, the players started to leave too. And what they found was the players who were the fastest, like the running backs, the wide receivers, got to the bank first, and the people who were offensive linemen and defensive linemen were the ones whose checks bounced. So in 1962, Harry Wismer decided to replace Sammy Baugh with Clyde Bulldog Turner as his head coach. But he also knew that Baugh had a clause in his contract that he would have to be paid unless he quit. So he decided just not to tell Sammy Baugh where the practice field was. Figuring if he doesn't show up, I can say he quit and not pay him. But Sammy Baugh somehow found out, got there, and they said, okay, well, you can be the kicking coach. So eventually, Wismer realized that Baugh was not going to resign, so he said, okay, I'll pay you the contract, the money that I owe you, but he never did. By the way, this picture up here is Harry Wismer. He's eating a leg of turkey in front of the TV, watching the Titans play, I believe, the Buffalo Bills in a Thanksgiving Day game. And this is Slinging Sammy Baugh. Okay, so in 1962, cheapskate Harry Wismer told the league that he could not really financially carry the Titans. So he agreed to sell the team, but then he declared bankruptcy to try to keep the team. The bankruptcy judge granted the AFL the authority to sell the team, which they did to a very good owner, Sonny Werblin, in March of 1963. Werblin changed the name from the Titans to the Jets because he wanted a new, more more modern kind of name for the team, so they became the Jets. And in 1964, he hired Weeb Ewbank as coach. Now, Weeb Ewbank, by the way, had been the coach of the Baltimore Colts in that sudden death overtime game in 1958. So, he was a well-known and very good coach. And then Werblin made headlines in the 1964 draft when he drafted and signed 2 quarterbacks for what was then an unheard of amount of money. He signed Joe Namath from Alabama for a $400,000 a year contract, and he signed Johnny Ewart, who had been the Heisman Trophy winner at Notre Dame, to a $200,000 $200,000 contract. So here you see the picture of Weeb, Johnny Ewart, Werblin, and Joe Namath. Okay, so the Jets have won the Super Bowl once, but it was historic. It was the 1968 season, the 1969 Super Bowl. Their only appearance in the Super Bowl, as a matter of fact. They got into the Super Bowl by beating the Oakland Raiders 27-23 in the AFC Championship game in windy Shea Stadium. And that game was a real pitch out between Joe Namath and Darryl LaMonica, the Oakland quarterback. In fact, in the fourth quarter, I think they exchanged touchdown drives. Namath put the Jets ahead with if I'm remembering correctly, there was a long pass to Don Maynard that set them up within the 20-yard line, and then a pass to Don Maynard that gave them the lead, 27-23. Then the Raiders got the ball and then lost it because Darryl LaMonica threw a pass that turned out to be a backward pass to the running back, and Jet linebacker picked it up, and the Jets sealed the victory. They probably knelt down to run out the clock, unlike the Giants and Joe Pisarcik, by the way. Then they were playing the very powerful Baltimore Colts, 13-1, in the Super Bowl. The Colts were 17-point favorites. And I'm sure you remember that in the week preceding the Super Bowl, Joe Namath said he would guarantee that the Jets would win the Super Bowl. Reporters all over the country were giving him grief and saying, the AFL has never won a Super Bowl. You're facing the Baltimore Colts, 13-1, team which had a great defense. You're crazy. This team's going to kill you. But Namath led the Jets to a great win in the Super Bowl. They got a 7-0 lead in the first half on a run by Matt Snell, the running back. It was the first time the AFL had ever led in the Super Bowl. He built the lead up to 16-0 in the second half, and the Jets went on to win that Super Bowl 16-7. And you see some of the Jets' top players in their history here. Joe Namath lounging on the beach in Miami where the Super Bowl was, as well as Matt Snell, Don Maynard, and George Sauer. And that Super Bowl led to maybe the most iconic photograph in NFL history, which is Joe Namath running off the field, calling, we're number one. And if you've never seen this before, just watch the Super Bowl next year. In the pregame before the Super Bowl, they will almost assuredly show Joe Namath running off the field with that. Okay, so that is the high point in Jets history. Let's talk about some of the low points. Remember the Heidi game? 1968, the Jets were playing Oakland, might have been in December, and they had the 4 o'clock game that day. And NBC, which had the game, had scheduled a remake of the movie Heidi to show at 7 o'clock. So the game was going on, and there's some network executive who was in charge of deciding whether to switch from the Jets-Raiders game to Heidi. And he was, when I've read about this, he was really sweating it. What do I do? What do I do? The Jets scored and took a lead 32-29 with less than 2 minutes to go. And he decided, okay, I'm going to switch to Heidi. The Raiders are not going to come back and win this game. But you know where this is going, right? The Raiders came back. Darryl LaMonica led them down the field. They scored and took a lead, 36-32. They kicked off. The Jets fumbled the kickoff. The Raiders picked it up and ran it in, so the Raiders won the game 43-32. Meanwhile, the NBC switchboard was being deluged with calls from all over the country. How can you switch from this game? And this is why now you'll hear things like, we're joining this show, which is already in progress, after you see a football game go on to 7:15, 7:30, 8 o'clock. So it's the Jets, the Raiders, and the Heidi game that brought that about. Then there's the butt fumble. This was in, 2012. And it's this. The Jets were playing the Patriots on Thanksgiving night. My family and I were in Disney World at the time, so my oldest son and I were watching this game from a tiki bar in Disney World. And Mark Sanchez took the snap. I think there was a miscommunication between him and the running back, so he didn't hand off. So Sanchez decided to run it himself. He ran it into the line, hit the rear end of one of the offensive linemen who was blocking for him, fumbled the ball, the Patriots picked it up and ran it in for a touchdown and won the game easily. As odd as it seems, Bill Belichick was named head coach of the New York Jets twice and never coached a game. Okay, the story there is, in 1997, Bill Parcells left the Patriots to join the Jets after bringing the Patriots to the Super Bowl, which they lost. But Parcells could not break his contract with Robert Kraft, the Patriots owner, and Kraft would not release him. So Parcells announced Bill Belichick as the new head coach of the New York Jets. And with the idea that when Parcells retired, Belichick would take over. Okay, so eventually, Robert Kraft relented and allowed Parcells to leave to coach the Jets and got some draft picks for it, which in Patriot history at the time they squandered. But anyway, so Parcells coached the Jets, and then when the Patriots, who had hired Pete Carroll as coach, were floundering, Robert Kraft wanted to hire Bill Belichick as coach. And in the NFL, if you're an assistant coach of any type, and another team wants you for a higher position, they're supposed to be allowed to interview you. But Parcells was crafty and he said, well, I'm going to retire, and now Belichick becomes head coach because of his contract to keep the Patriots from getting Belichick. While this was going on, Jets ownership was changing and Belichick was not happy about it. So at the press conference that was going to introduce him as the new head coach of the New York Jets, he wrote on a napkin, "I resign as HC of the NYJ." So he never coached a game for the Jets. And Belichick was concerned about the new ownership and how much control he would have, because if you know Belichick, he likes to have control. And he was also concerned about having Bill Parcells over his shoulder. And I think the Jets PR guy, after Belichick stepped down, went to the microphone and said, I think we've just seen a man who unfortunately is having some mental issues now. So anyway, Belichick never coached a game. And then, I don't know, the Jets have had a history of drafting quarterbacks that never worked out for them. Mark Sanchez, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Zach Wilson, and some of them have gone on to have success at other teams. They also had what I would call as stumbles with signing old Green Bay quarterbacks, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, and neither really worked out well for them. So you guys probably know this better than I do living in New England, but they always seem to be referred to as the same old Jets. You guys have probably heard that, right? And then there's this, and I'm not sure what to say about this, but Joe Namath decided in 1973 and 1974 to do pantyhose commercials. And he was panned for this at the time, and he put them on, actually. And the commercial it pans up his legs to his torso, where he says something like, I don't wear pantyhose, but if Beauty Mist can make my legs look this good, imagine what they'll do to yours. I have no idea how Beauty Mist did after that. I think I'll leave it at that. Okay, now you want to talk about weird? Let's talk about the Patriots. The Patriots became the 8th of those franchises to join the AFL. Bud Adams it was Lamar Hunt and Bud Adams who formed the AFL. Billy Sullivan was the first owner. He paid $25,000 to join the league. But Billy Sullivan, who was also cheap and also sort of shady, only contributed $8,300 of his own and got other people to contribute, including people who had similarly shady backgrounds. The Patriots for 40 years were a moribund team. In the 1960s, they had one good year. They got to the AFL championship game in 1963 and lost it to San Diego 51-10. They didn't even have a place to play. They wound up playing at BU Stadium, Boston University. And if you've ever driven into Boston, you see these, it's where the Braves used to play, and you see these dorms that are in the form of left field, center field, and right field, which is where the BU Stadium is. They played at BC, they played at Harvard, they played at Fenway Park, and they even had one home game in Birmingham, Alabama. Can you imagine being a season ticket holder and getting a note from the Patriots saying, this home game in September is going to be in Birmingham, Alabama? But they were playing in Fenway Park. The Red Sox were playing in September. They rarely played in October. And they were afraid that they'd tear up Fenway Park's field. So the Patriots looked for another place to play. The AFL was looking to expand into Birmingham, so they decided to play that game in Birmingham. And there are many, many, many weird stories in Patriots history. They used to practice at this field in East Boston High. So if you were driving past the high school field, you could see you could scout the Patriots just by driving past the field or stopping and watching. And they used bed sheets over pipes to watch films. In one of the preseason games, there was a fire in the stands, and all the fans came down and were mingling with the players on the field, and the players decided, we don't want to play anymore, so they just stopped. They had a coach who was introduced at his press conference. I'm not going to do it just in case, but he grabbed the microphone and almost was electrocuted. Somebody pulled him away and saved him. That coach, by the way, was the offensive coordinator of the New York Jets when they won the Super Bowl. Cleve Rush is his name. And the Patriots were considering hiring either him or the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Colts, who lost that game, Chuck Noll. Chuck Noll, you may remember, went on to win 4 Super Bowls with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Cleve Rush, among other things, he decided that there was the Purple People Eaters, the Doomsday Defense of Minnesota and Dallas, respectively. So he decided he was going to create the Black Power defense and have 11 black players on defense, regardless of whether they were the best players or not, but he just wanted the nickname. Only the Patriots. They were going to play a game in Buffalo, and the owner, Billy Sullivan, said, okay, we've got hotel rooms, and you can go rest before the game. Don't pull down the covers. If you pull down the covers, we have to pay $15 a room. If you don't, we pay only $10. So the players all said, who cares? And they pulled down the covers, got their rest, and played the game. One of the weirdest stories is a fan running onto the field to help them win a game, and nobody noticed it. So the story here, it was in 1961. They were playing the Dallas Texans, who are now the Kansas City Chiefs, in Boston University Stadium. The Patriots were winning 28-21, and Cotton Davidson, the Dallas quarterback, threw a long pass near the end of the game to Chris Burford, and they got it down to the 1-yard line. The fans all thought the game was over. They stormed the field. The officials had to move them out, so they formed sort of a rim around the field in the end zone. So on the next play, just as Cotton Davidson was about to get the ball snapped to him, a fan ran out on the field, across the field. Here's a picture. Oh, I think I've got a picture of this. Yep. Across the field, waved his arms in front of Chris Burford. Burford was distracted, the pass fell incomplete, and the Patriots won the game. Nobody saw it. All the officials missed it. Gino Cappelletti, who I interviewed for one of the books that I wrote, was telling me that the next day, the players saw this on the film, and they just burst out laughing. We won the game because of this guy. So they started talking about, who was that? And it looked like a guy, I don't know if you can see it very well, looks like a guy in a trench coat, which Billy Sullivan often wore. So some people thought it was Billy Sullivan trying to get his team a win. But Gino Cappelletti was telling the players, nah, that's just some bookie from East Boston trying to protect his bet. Okay, 1970s, they finally settled on a home in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And they figured, we can't be the Boston Patriots if we play in Foxborough. Foxborough, by the way, is 30 miles maybe away from Boston. So, who cares? The New York Giants are still the New York Giants, even though they play in New Jersey. The Detroit Pistons moved to Auburn Hills and were still the Detroit Pistons. But they said, we can't be the Boston Patriots. So they decided they were going to name themselves the Bay State Patriots. But Upton Bell became the general manager, and he said, no, we're not going to be the Bay State Patriots because newspaper editors will shorten that, and every time they lose, the headlines will be, BS Patriots lose again. So that's why they became the New England Patriots. They had the first game at it was Schaefer Stadium against the New York Giants in the preseason, and it was a disaster. If you've ever been to this stadium, and I don't know why you would, because it's out in the middle of almost nowhere, and the only way to get to it is on Route 1 in Foxborough. And at this time, Route 1 was, I think, just a two-lane road. So traffic was backed up forever. It still is. They've widened the road, but if you go to a game now, traffic is still a mess. So some fans weren't able to get to the game at the start of the game. Some even abandoned their cars on the side of the road and walked to the game. And then getting out was just as bad, and some fans didn't get home until 4 a.m. What was that joke about the guy who, was having the affair with the secretary that you told before this? So I wonder what they told their family back at home when they got home at 4 a.m. from a 7 o'clock football game. Again, if you've ever been to Old Schaefer Stadium, the seats were aluminum benches. If you sit on them in the summer, they're hot. If you sit on them in the winter, they're cold. If you sit next to a big guy, you only have half a seat to sit in. But the worst part was at halftime of this game, fans do what fans do at halftime. They all went to the bathroom. And the Foxborough Fire Department realized that the water pressure got down so low that they couldn't protect a house if a house caught on fire during the game. So they told the Patriots, you've got to fix this problem. So the Patriots, I don't know how much money they spent, but they fixed the problem. And one Saturday, they had what was called the Big Flush. I told you, only the Patriots. They hired people to come in, and they stationed them in every men's room and ladies' room in the stadium. And then when they made a sound of a horn over the loudspeaker, they flushed every toilet, flushed every urinal, turned on the water in every sink to prove to the Foxborough Fire Department that the water pressure was not going to drop to an unacceptable level. So that was the Big Flush. This, by the way, is a picture of people trying to drive to that stadium. I should have shown that, pointed that out before. What's that? No. Once again, they had one good year. That was 1976 when they lost to the Raiders in the playoff in a game that even the other players in the AFL thought the Raiders were given to by the officials. There were so many calls and non-calls. If you're a Patriots fan, I'll talk to you about it later. If not, we'll just go on from there. They had a holdout, John Hanna and Leon Gray, and they fired their coach before the last game of the season because he had decided he had enough with Billy Sullivan and left. But the weirdest story of all is when they called a man down from the stands to play in a football game. The man was this guy, Bob Gladio, number 24, who was nicknamed Harpo. And if you've ever seen a Marx Brothers movie, you can see from his hair why he was called Harpo. But Bob Gladio played for Notre Dame. He played in that famous Notre Dame-Michigan State game in 1966, and he was drafted by the Patriots. And so his first season was 1969. He went to training camp, thought he'd made the team because nobody asked him to bring his playbook and show up to the coach. But then he went home and saw on TV the list of cuts for the Patriots, and he saw his name. So he went to the coach, Cleve Rush, and said, what happened? How come I was cut? I thought I made the team. He said, no, you almost made it, but you didn't. But you can be on the taxi squad. But you've got to tell me now if you want to be on it, because I've got a guy on the line, and he's going to take it if you don't. Taxi squad was the old practice squad they used to have. And players would practice with the team and then sometimes be called up to play. All right, so he was on the taxi squad all year. 1970 comes around. He's having a pretty good preseason again. Again, he thinks he makes the team. But he goes home and he reads in the paper the next day the cuts, and he's cut again. All right, now I interviewed him for the book, and he can tell the story far better than I can, but I'll try to reproduce it as best I can. So he said he was really down. He found a girl and they partied on Thursday. They partied again on Friday. They partied again on Saturday. You can use your imaginations. On Sunday he got up and he told her, I'm sentimental, I'm going to go to the Patriots game. So he calls his friend Jack, and he and his friend Jack had, as he described it, a 6-pack of Schlitz and some homemade port wine, and then they went to the game. By now the game was at Harvard Stadium, and Gladio got in by showing the guy at the ticket booth his picture in the program and saying, look, I was part of the team. You got to let us in. So the guy let him in. So they were going up to their seats, and Jack said, I'll go get some hot dogs and beer. You go up to the seats, I'll meet you there. Meanwhile, in the Patriots locker room, they're having a contract dispute with a defensive back, and it doesn't work out. So over the loudspeaker comes, Bob Gladio, please report to the Patriot locker room. Remember, Gladio's had a little bit to drink, so he looks up and says, is that you, God? And the way he described it, he said there was a blue-gray sky, so he thought, Notre Dame, blue-gray sky, God. Maybe it was it. Again over the loudspeaker, Bob Gladio, please report to the Patriot locker room. So Gladio said, now I'm starting to see dollar signs flashing in my head. So he went down to the locker room and they said, you're on the team, suit up. So he suits up. Meanwhile, Jack comes back up to the stands with the hot dogs and beer and says to the people around them, where's my friend? And they say, we don't know. He was up, he was down, he was up, he was down, he left, and we haven't seen him. So Jack is saying, oh, Harpo, what are you doing now? Okay, so it's kickoff time. And the Patriot coach says, kickoff team, get on the field. Patriots were kicking off to Miami. So Gladio says, oh no, that's me. So he's on the kickoff team. And he said, I'm not feeling that great. I don't want a part of hitting anybody or doing anything with anybody. So the kickoff is made. The Dolphins are coming. They formed a wedge, which you could do legally at the time, to block. And Gladio said, well, I didn't want any part of that wedge, so I veered to the right and then cut to the left. Meanwhile, the running back veered to the left, cut to the right. We ran into each other, and he fell down. Over the loudspeaker, tackle by number 24, Bob Gladio. And Jack is looking down, and there's Bob running off the field. Bob stayed for the whole year, but that's one of the weirdest stories that I can remember. Patriot history, every decade there seemed to be one successful year. The same is true of the 1980s. They reached the Super Bowl for the first time under Coach Raymond Berry, one of the players in that 1958 championship game. And as typical of the Patriots, they lost it badly, 46-10 to the Bears. Their top player was John Hanna, who many people consider him to be the best offensive lineman in pro football history. He was really good. And maybe the second best player in Patriot history, and you know who's number one, Brady. But the weirdness continues. There was this snowplow game. This was in 1982, I believe. And the Patriots were playing Miami, big snowstorm. The score was 0-0 late in the game, and the Patriots were down in field goal range. And they'd have snowplows, and every time out, the snowplow would come out and clear the yard line so that the officials could see, what yard are we on? So Ron Meyer, the Patriot coach, went to one of the snowplow drivers and said, when you're clearing that yard line, just make a little semicircle here and clear a spot for the kicker. You can see that in the picture here. So they cleared a spot for the kicker, John Smith, who kicked the field goal, and the Patriots won the game 3-0. John Shula was the Miami coach, and he was livid. You can't do that. This is not fair. But the league said there's no rule against this. The game stood. The next year, the Patriots played in Miami, and Don Shula had snow trucked in and piled it behind the Patriots bench. However, it's Miami, right? The snow didn't last. It didn't have the effect that he wanted it to have. The other thing in this time frame is Patriots finally beat the Raiders in a playoff game. And Patrick Sullivan, who was the son of the owner, kept taunting the Raiders during the game and after the game. So he's walking off the field and he's yelling at Howie Long, who you know probably from the pregame broadcast, and Matt Millen, who were big guys for the Raiders. And John Hanna's walking off the field with Steve Nelson, and he says to Steve Nelson, linebacker, should we help him? And Steve Nelson says, nah, he got himself into it. Let him get himself out of it. So you see here, Matt Millen actually swung his helmet and hit Patrick Sullivan in the head with his helmet. So in the post game, they were interviewing the trainer, the reporters were asking the trainer, any significant injuries? And he said, no, everybody's healthy, except for that goofball Patrick Sullivan who got hit in the head, but he'll be all right. All right, just as was true of the Giants, and actually was sort of true with the Jets as well, things changed when Bill Parcells became the coach of the Patriots. He was there for 1 year before Robert Kraft purchased the team and Drew Bledsoe was made the #1 draft pick. So after many, many down years, the team became better. Parcells is a great coach, by the way. I think he's fantastic. They reached the playoffs, lost to Belichick's Cleveland Browns team that year, but he reached the Super Bowl in 1997 with the Patriots, and they lost to Green Bay 35-21. But while the Super Bowl preparations were going on, Bill Parcells wanted to leave the Patriots, and he was negotiating with the New York Jets while the team was preparing for the Super Bowl. The Patriots lost, and Bill Parcells did not return with the Patriots on the team jet back to New England. He went on his own back home. That'll come back in a few minutes. And Kraft obviously was not happy with this, but he liked Bill Belichick, was thinking of hiring him, but at this point he was so mad at Parcells he didn't want to have anything to do with anybody who had anything to do with Parcells. So he hired Pete Carroll, and the team just nosedived. They had a worse record every year of the 4 years when Pete Carroll was coach. I don't know how he was with the Jets, but I don't remember he had much success there either. Finally, after 40 years of mediocrity, Parcells called Kraft one day, and when Kraft picked up the phone, he said, "This is Darth Vader, let's make a deal." So he made a deal, and the Patriots traded a #1 draft pick to the Jets to be allowed to hire Belichick as head coach. Any of you know who that #1 draft pick was that the Jets got in that draft? He's Aaron Glenn, who's now the current head coach of the New York Jets, by the way. So there's that tie. So anyway, Belichick was introduced as head coach in 2000. They had Belichick. They've got Kraft in place as an owner. They've got Drew Bledsoe as quarterback. But still, they needed one more thing, and that was this guy. He was a 6th-round draft pick in 2000, Tom Brady, the 199th player picked, and then success came. They had 6 Super Bowls in 18 years that they won, and they became not only a dynasty, but a model franchise. Let's talk about the start of Brady's career. Brady's a rookie quarterback. One day he's walking down the steps to a practice at what by then was now Gillette Stadium. No, I'm sorry, it was Foxborough Stadium. And Kraft was walking up the steps, and as they passed one another, Brady said to Kraft, "Do you know who I am?" And Kraft said, "Yeah, you're our 6th-round draft pick." And Brady said to him, "Drafting me will be the best decision this organization's ever made." And Kraft they walked past each other, and Kraft turns back and says, "Who is this guy?" But, that was the confidence that Brady had even at that time. Interestingly, Belichick kept him on the team as the 4th quarterback on the team, which is unheard of. And you see the names of the people that were ahead of him. One is Bledsoe, and the other 2 were not so well known. And in his first season, Bledsoe was a quarterback. Brady played in 1 game, threw 3 passes, didn't do so well. Then the 2001 season, the team started out 0-2. Bledsoe was hurt at the end of the game 2 with the Jets. It was a clean but vicious hit by Jets linebacker Mo Lewis. Bledsoe almost died, as he told me later when I interviewed him for the book. And the story there is he got this hit, and he was woozy after that, but he went to the sidelines. And on the sidelines, the other quarterbacks were noticing that he was asking questions like, why doesn't he know these things? But they sent him back in for a couple of plays. He was still woozy, so they took him out. The game ended, they lost to the Jets, and as he's walking off the field, the trainer comes up to him and says, "We're going to the hospital." And Bledsoe says, "No, let me do the team prayer, and then we can go to the hospital." And he goes into and the trainer says, "No, we're going to the hospital now. I don't like the way you look." So he goes into the locker room to get out of his uniform, and he can't lift his arms to take his uniform off. And he said, usually at this point of the game, your heartbeat is slowing down, but his was speeding up. So they got him into the ambulance, they got him to the hospital, and they found that the hit had sheared a blood vessel in his chest. And when they realized that they pumped Bledsoe told me that he normally has 8 liters of blood in his body. When they opened his chest cavity, they took out 2 liters of blood, and the blood was coming out at the rate of 1 liter an hour. And this was well below the levels of being able to operate on him. So they decided to spend time recycling the blood that he was losing back into his system until it healed enough so that they could perform the surgery. So, as I say, Bledsoe said that this guy saved his life. Brady stepped in, and sort of the rest is history. After the hospital stay, Bledsoe came back and helped him on the sidelines. Brady and the Patriots raised their records to 5-4. And when Bledsoe was cleared again, Belichick made the decision not to go with the high-powered, high-paid Drew Bledsoe as quarterback, but Tom Brady. And the team never lost a game again that season. They beat Oakland in the first game of the playoffs. The last game played at the old Foxborough Stadium. And if you remember, the tuck rule was a big play in that game. Late in the game, Brady went back to pass, had his arm back here, was hit by Charles Woodson. You see the picture there. And as he was bringing his arm down, the ball fell. Oakland recovered, and everybody thought the game was over. But then they reviewed it and said, no, his arm was in the throwing motion, and he hadn't tucked it in. And the rule at the time was, if you're in the throwing motion, it's an incomplete pass. So the Patriots got the ball back, scored a tying field goal, and then won the game in overtime. Then they beat Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh when Brady was injured and Bledsoe had to come in and relieve him. Then they had another shocking upset to talk about. They played the greatest show on turf, the St. Louis Rams in the Super Bowl, and won it 20-17. Patriots took a 17-0 lead in that game. The Rams had 17 fourth quarter points, and the Patriots got the ball with like 1:47 to go in the game. And the broadcasters, John Madden and Pat Summerall, were saying, oh, the Patriots are just going to take a knee and play for overtime. But there are lots of meanwhiles in Patriots history. Meanwhile, on the Patriots sideline, Belichick is saying, my defense is tired. If we go into overtime, we're going to lose this game. So they said, let's just go for it. So Charlie Weiss, the offensive coordinator, said to Brady, okay, just don't throw the ball away. Let's see what we can do. So Brady went into the game, and John Madden's in the broadcast booth saying, I don't understand what the Patriots are doing. They've got a young quarterback, inexperienced. They should take a knee and go to overtime. So Brady throws, I don't know, about 4 or 5 passes, moves them down the field. And as they're moving down the field, John Madden gave this quote, and they're lining up for the game-winning field goal. And John Madden said, what Tom Brady just did gives me goosebumps. And so Adam Vinatieri came in, kicked the field goal, and the Patriots won the Super Bowl. Okay, remember Parcells wouldn't go back with the Patriots on the plane. So Belichick had a rule that you've got to go back on the team plane. But this was the era where after a Super Bowl, you'd see the commercial, John Elway, you just won the Super Bowl. What are you going to do next? I'm going to Disney World. So they asked Tom Brady if he would go to Disney World. So Brady sort of sheepishly went to Bill Belichick's hotel room and said, Coach, I've been asked to go to Disney World, but you've got the rule that we've got to go back on the team plane. Is it okay to go to Disney World for this commercial? And Belichick's, yeah, sure. How many times are you going to win the Super Bowl? Happily for the Patriots. So he went. Then, okay, their second Super Bowl win, they released Lawyer Malloy. They lost 2 games. They were 2-2, but then they finished 14-2, defeated Tennessee in a very cold Gillette Stadium, defeated Indianapolis and Peyton Manning in the AFC Championship game, won the Super Bowl 32-29 in a wild game. Nobody scored in the first quarter, then it was 14-10 at halftime. Nobody scored in the third quarter, and then 37 points were scored in the fourth quarter, and the Patriots won on a last-second field goal again. But this is the Patriots, so things can't go smoothly. So this was the game that at halftime featured Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction. I'm not going to say anything more about that.
How come you got no picture of that?
Yeah, every time I talk about the Patriots, I get asked that question. I have seen a picture, but I don't include it in the present. Yeah. Then they won the next year, Super Bowl III, 2004, 2005. Their winning streak went to 21 straight games. They played the Colts and their high-powered offense in the first playoff game and held Peyton Manning to just 3 points. Then they played the Steelers with their great defense and hung 41 points on them and beat the Steelers. And then they beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl and became the second team ever to win 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. All right, then there was the 2007 season. In 2006, the Patriots, Belichick wouldn't sign Deion Branch, who was Brady's favorite receiver. So they got into the 2006 playoffs and lost because they didn't have a good receiver. So in 2007, he wound up getting Wes Welker and Randy Moss, and that's a team that went undefeated until the Super Bowl with the Giants. You also remember that was the year of Spygate, where Belichick was accused of having people on the sidelines film, it was the Jets, on the other sidelines to try to get their signals. So he was fined, Belichick was fined $500,000. The team was fined $1 million and lost a draft pick. I actually thought Belichick should have been suspended, if not for the next game or two, at least the next time they played the Jets, since he had presumably had gotten an advantage against the Jets, but it didn't happen. We've already talked about that Super Bowl, and I've had enough pain from that. I'm going to go on. So then it was a few years later, and we're talking now about 2014, and Deflategate, another controversy with the Patriots, where Tom Brady was accused, and the Patriots were accused of deflating the footballs to get a better grip on them. This happened in a game that the Patriots won 45-7, so it was not like a deciding factor, even if it happened. So the first time I heard about this, I was driving into work the next day, and I was listening to sports talk radio from Boston. And there's these two jokesters who were always interviewing Tom Brady the next day. And at the end of the interview, they said, "Tom, what's this stuff about the footballs not being deflated enough?" And I'm thinking, okay, so they're just trying to goad him into something. But Tom Brady laughed and said, "I thought I'd heard everything." And he said, "There's nothing to this." But it didn't die down. Brady then gave a press conference where he describes what happens. And I did not know this at the time, but before each football game, each quarterback gets to go through a whole bunch of footballs and decide on the 24 that they want to have used during the game, by the feel of the ball and everything. And so those 24 go to the sidelines, and then when your team has the ball, they bring out the footballs that your quarterback has wanted for the game, and when the other team has the ball, the same thing happens. So he said, and this sounded truthful to me, "When I pick the footballs, I don't want anybody doing anything with them." But he was accused of, well, we'll talk about that in a second. Then Belichick had a press conference, and they talked about this, and he said, "I'm not an expert on footballs. I would say that I'm not the Mona Lisa Mona Lisa Vito of the football world." Do you know who she is? The movie My Cousin Vinny, right. She's a key witness at the end because she's an expert on automotive construction and things like that. So Belichick said he's not the Mona Lisa Vito of the football world. But this became like the top story in the news across the country, like NBC Nightly News, ABC, CBS Nightly News. Deflategate was the top story in the country. There's nothing more important in the world. And by the way, if you live in New England in the winter and it's a cold, snowy day, your tires get deflated. So the football was deflated. There were like kids who did school projects that showed that the football gets deflated in cold, snowy conditions. Anyway, while this was going on, the Patriots got to the Super Bowl, and Brady led them to a comeback win over the Seattle Seahawks. They were losing 24-14, and they came back and got 2 touchdowns at the end of the game. With 2 seconds to go, Brady hit Julian Edelman with a touchdown, gave the Patriots a 28-24 lead. Brady was 13 of 15 on those closing drives that got the 2 touchdowns, but the game wasn't quite over yet, because Seattle got down to like the 1-yard line on a long pass that was bounced up into the air by the Seattle receiver. Malcolm Butler knocked it into the air. It came back down, but the receiver caught it, and Malcolm Butler was smart enough to tackle him on the 1-yard line instead of letting him score. But the Seahawks were on the 1-yard line. They gave the ball to Marshawn Lynch, who was known as Beast Mode. He was a big guy. He didn't score. So on the next play, they threw a pass that Malcolm Butler intercepted to save the Super Bowl for the Patriots. Interestingly, while this was going on, before this play, coaches were in Belichick's headset saying, call timeout, we need time to give Brady a chance to come back if they score. And Belichick is noticing confusion on the Seattle sidelines. Pete Carroll was the coach. He said, no, if they want a timeout, let them call timeout. So they called a pass inexplicably, and this, when the Patriots came out and saw the formation, this was one that they had practiced during the pre-Super Bowl practices. And it always worked for the offense. The defense was never able to stop it, but Malcolm Butler recognized it, made the interception, and the Patriots won the Super Bowl. I'm just going to skip over this in the interest of time, but there was a big investigation. Ted Wells, who was a classmate of Tom and mine at Holy Cross, produced the Ted Wells report that said it was more probable than not that Tom Brady might have been generally aware that the people who were handling the footballs deflated the footballs. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm on trial, I don't want to have myself convicted because of something being more probable than not and being generally aware. But Roger Goodell, that was enough for him. He suspended Brady for 4 games. Patriots lost more money in draft picks. Then there were hearings and court cases. I even wrote a letter to the judge who was hearing the case to explain why I didn't think this was justified. And one day I went to work and a guy said to me, "You know, you're famous. The judge included your letter in the court docket." Okay. Of course, other letters were included too, so it wasn't just me. Anyway, there were other instances of Roger Goodell handling things badly. Remember the Ray Rice situation where he beat up his girlfriend? But they weren't punished like Tom Brady was. And the Steelers were accused twice of using underinflated footballs, but never happened. So Deflategate dragged on. The judge ruled in Brady's favor. He was reinstated. Patriots played the 2015 season, fell 2 points short of getting into the Super Bowl. They scored a 20-18, tried a 2-point conversion play that failed. We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. But a 3-judge panel overturned the other judge's ruling, so Brady's suspension was reinstated, and Brady had to sit out the first 4 games of the next season. And the Patriots had to get by with Jimmy Garoppolo as their quarterback, and then Jacoby Brissett. My wife loves me including a picture of Jimmy Garoppolo in this picture. If you didn't hear what she said, I feel compelled to say she said he was a good-looking Italian. Anyway, so they played Atlanta in the Super Bowl, and they were trailing 28-3 late in the third quarter. This was the ultimate comeback for Brady and the Patriots. They overcame that 25-point lead, and they needed 2 2-point conversions to tie the game and send it into overtime. Remember the year before, they had lost because of the 2-point conversion? So one was a direct snap to running back Kevin Falk. The other was a pass to Danny Amendola that he caught and brought it in. Then the Patriots got the ball and won that game in overtime. This was a key play in their drive that tied the game. There was a pass to Julian Edelman that hit Edelman's hands, bounced up into the air. Defender were trying to catch it, to knock it down. And you see how much space Edelman went to catch the ball and caught it just before it hit the ground. And you can see there's not much space between the football and the ground in this picture, which leads to this picture, which I always liked. While the officials were reviewing the play, the Atlanta defenders pointing to one jumbotron at the end of the field and saying, "You dropped the ball, you dropped the ball." And Edelman's pointing to the jumbotron at the other end of the field saying, "No, I caught it, look." So they ruled that he caught it. The Patriots got the ball and were able to tie the game and send it into overtime. And Brady, if you ever watch a replay of this game, Brady throws 4 perfect passes to get the team down to the 1-yard line, and James White runs it in for the winning touchdown. We're almost done with this part, and we won't be long. 2000, after this, Belichick wanted to trade Tom Brady. Crazy. But Kraft reportedly told him to trade Jimmy Garoppolo instead. Belichick was mad and only got a 2nd-round draft pick for Garoppolo, and then in the draft traded down with that pick as well. Patriots made it back to the Super Bowl, lost again when the defense really failed them. They couldn't stop the Eagles all day, which led to one question, which was, where was Malcolm Butler, who had played the whole season, but Belichick kept him out of the Super Bowl for reasons that nobody knows except Belichick. And one deflected pass, one tackle could have maybe helped the Patriots win the game, but they didn't. But they got back in the next year. They played 2 high-powered offenses in the playoffs. They beat Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes in the AFC Championship game. Then Belichick changed the defense into his own defense for the Super Bowl against the Rams, and they won that Super Bowl 13-3. There was only one play in the red zone in that game, and it's this play with Sony Michel running it in for the touchdown. All right, now we're at the end of the Belichick era in New England. Brady was allowed to leave as a free agent. How do you let Tom Brady leave your team? You've got a guy who may be the best quarterback of all time, but Belichick thought he could do better. Meanwhile, Brady goes to Tampa Bay and wins his 7th Super Bowl with Tampa Bay, and the Patriots have been in a nosedive since, including 2 4-13 seasons, the last 2 seasons. A lot of times people ask, who's the most important player in Patriots franchise history, Brady or Belichick, and who's responsible for more Super Bowls? Well, look at these numbers. With Brady, the Patriots had a winning percentage of 76.7%, and were 30-11 in the playoffs. Since Brady left, their winning percentage dropped from 76% to 39%, and they played in one playoff game and lost it. That's my position, Your Honor. You can decide for yourself. Okay, the last part of this, and I'll try to be quick. Tom asked me to talk about some of the experiences with interviewing players for the book. I've written 2 books about the Patriots. One was called Patriot Pride, which was the 50-year history that he mentioned. And I interviewed a number of players that you see here, and coaches. And then the other one was Comeback, about Deflategate. So I'll tell you about a handful of those. First interview that I did was with John Hannah. Again, we talked about maybe the second best Patriot player ever. And the Patriots arranged for me to meet him at Patriot headquarters in Foxborough. And I'm thinking before the game, I better ask the right question, because this guy's got a reputation of being a surly kind of guy. If I ask the wrong question, he's strong enough to push me through the wall, which he probably could have. So he said that coming to the Patriots from Alabama was a big change. Alabama had big facilities, had a weight room, and with the Patriots, the facilities were much smaller, and you had to join a gym to be able to lift weights when you're with the Patriots. I'm going to skip ahead. With each person I interviewed, I'd say, I'm going to bring up the name of a player. You tell me the first thing that comes to mind about them. And I brought up the name Russ Francis, who was a tight end for the Patriots in 1970. And John Hannah said, such and such a thing. Then he said, wait a minute, you better not print that. Say this instead. So I promised him that I would never say what he told me first about Russ Francis. And I'm not going to say it today either. Sorry. It was not complimentary, right? Gino Cappelletti, who was Mr. Patriot, he was one of their first stars. And this interview was interesting because I did it again at the Patriots Stadium. And his family was waiting outside, so I tried to do it as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Gino says, Femia, huh? Italian. What part of Italy is your family from? Then he started talking about recipes and how, marinara sauce is different here than it is there, and so on. He's the one who told me about the hotel, the $10 versus $15 in the hotel, and the films on the bed sheets. And he did everything to make the team. He was a wide receiver, he was a defensive back, and he was a kicker. And I asked him at one point, what did players think when the Jets won that Super Bowl III? He said, we were ecstatic. We'd lost the first 2 Super Bowls badly to Green Bay, and this gave us equal footing with the NFL. So all the players around the league were happy with Joe Namath and the Jets for winning that Super Bowl. Drew Bledsoe, I've told you about the seriousness of his injury, but one story that you may find interesting is that I got the interview of him through his mother. So the Patriots set up some interviews, and sometimes I'd talk to a player or a coach, and they'd say, oh, you should also talk to such and such. Here's their contact info. But I was semi-retired at the time, and I thought, I want to talk to Drew Bledsoe. So I did research online and dug up a phone number for him, and I called the number, and I got the message, voicemail box is full, hang up and try again. So I did that a couple of times, and then I said, well, I'm going to try to find his parents, because I knew they were from Washington State. So I found his parents' number and called them, and I talked to Barbara Bledsoe, a very nice lady, and explained what I was doing and why I couldn't reach Drew directly. And she said, I'll let him know, and I don't know if he'll do the interview, but I'll let him know. So I tried calling Drew Bledsoe's number a couple of times again, and again, the same message. I later found out he has a home in Washington State and a home in Montana, and he was at the home in Montana. So Barbara Bledsoe had given me her email, so I wrote to her and said, still don't know if Drew will do the interview, but he should at least know that his voicemail box is full in case he gets a more important phone call than this idiot trying to call and interview him. So she said, I will tell him, and I'll remind him to be the polite boy that he was brought up to be and give you an answer. So the next day, I got an email from Drew Bledsoe saying, when can we do this interview? The interview was great. In fact, it's my favorite interview in the book. And that's when he told me about the stuff with the trainer. And as I did with everybody I interviewed, I gave him the chance to review what I wrote before it was put into the book, in case I had misquoted him or I wanted them to have the chance to do it. Drew actually did that. He wanted to review it. Actually, I should say, that's when he reviewed it, he told me about Ron O'Neal, the trainer. But I also wrote a note back to Barbara Bledsoe to say, the interview happened, Drew wants to review it, I'm gonna let you review it too, and you can see what you think. Then I got this note back from his mother saying, Vin, I'm sitting here with tears streaming down my face. Thank you for capturing the true character of my son in your interview. And I'm thinking, I better go back and reread what I wrote. But she said that sometimes people will ask for an interview and say they're going to do a good job, but then it's like a hatchet job. And she said, you sounded nice. I thought he would want to do the interview, and I'm glad it worked out. So anyway, interview arranged through his mother. Troy Brown, I did the interview in his home. He invited me to come to his home in Foxborough. Troy Brown is a versatile player, many key plays in Patriot history. And I got to the interview at his house early, because I like to get places early. So I drove around a little bit in the neighborhood and then got to his house for our 11 o'clock meeting. And he asked if he could have his PR person be there for it, and it was a she. And she came, and at one point the doorbell rang, and she went to answer and came back and said, it's a policeman, he wants to talk to both of you. So we went to the door, and the policeman said, there's been report of a strange green car in the neighborhood. Is that your car, sir? Pointing to me. Yes, and I explained why I was there. And he said to Troy, is everything okay? And Troy said, yeah, everything's okay. But then he leaned into Troy and said, are you sure everything's okay? And Troy said, yeah, everything's cool, everything's fine. And I'm driving away thinking, this is weird. Do I look like a stalker? You guys can form your own judgment. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. I've parked right in his driveway. I guess it's good that they're protecting him, but it's also sort of weird to do it that way. But I had a woman work for me once who had a house near one of the prisons in Massachusetts, and she said, when a prisoner escaped, they would just come to your door and say, we're coming in to search your house to see if the prisoner's here. Because they thought if the prisoner has a gun on you, or said if you let on in any way that I'm here, I'll kill you. Anyway, so that's the only time I had the police called in for an interview. Last story, Raymond Berry was the coach. I did a very good interview with him. He was a very good interviewee. He was in that greatest game of all time. And one comment that I remember is he was talking about playing with the Baltimore Colts team, and he said, I really enjoyed playing for Unitas. And I thought to myself, for Unitas? I would have expected him to say with Unitas. But these were the days that the quarterback called the plays, and Berry thought he was really playing for Johnny Unitas. Anyway, okay, I should say, Raymond Berry, the year they went to the Super Bowl, the next year, the Patriots, he discovered the Patriots had a drug problem, and he cleaned up the team before the NFL had any kind of drug policy. He went to each player's home and told them, we're not going to tolerate this, we'll help you get clean, but we're not going to have you on drugs when you're playing on this team. So a couple of players credited him with saving their lives. If they had stayed with the drugs, they would have probably had big problems. So a few years later, I got this handwritten note from Raymond Berry. Actually twice. One time I got a note from him after he read the book the first time and said, where were you when I was negotiating my contract with the Baltimore Colts? And then a few years later, I got another handwritten note from him that said, I was cleaning out my office and I found your book and I reread your interview with me, and I want to ask you, would you be willing to do a eulogy at my funeral? Anyway, I don't know if I ever will. He lives in Tennessee, but I really enjoyed that. Okay, so other interviews, Steve Grogan, Upton Bell, who was the general manager we talked about earlier, Randy Vataha, who was not a well-known receiver, but he's been a successful businessman and at one point tried to buy the NHL. I didn't know you could buy a National Hockey League, but he tried. John Morris, who was a fellow Holy Cross graduate. We talk more about books than about anything else, and other players. So I'm going to end with one final word from Bill Belichick, who I describe as a cheerful, iconic personality who was part of three teams. So in the words of Bill Belichick, thank you all for coming. And you can... So if anybody, it's late, I ran late. If any questions or anything, I'll be glad to answer them later on.
Well, thank you, Vin. I'm still laughing about some of the funny and weird things you told us. I think we have time for two questions.
So I have to ask about what you think about Belichick and his current girlfriend.
The question was about Belichick taking over as head coach of the University of North Carolina. All of us in New England were stunned. You know, he's just a few wins away from having the most wins of a coach of all time. And he decided to go to the University of North Carolina. I didn't realize at the time, most of us didn't realize, his father had been an assistant coach at the University of North Carolina, so there's a tie there. But still, I'm not sure that this is going to last very long. I think he'll want to get back into the National Football League, but the question is, will there be any team that wants him to be the coach? So we were all surprised, to answer your question. What about what? He's got, Belichick is 76 years old, I think. 73? And he's got a girlfriend who's 24. And he did an interview on CBS or something, and she was there. And at one point, somebody said, "How did you two meet?" And the girlfriend yelled from the table she was sitting at, "We're not going to talk about that." So it seems like she's sort of running his life a little bit. Yeah, he was always in control of everything and wanted to be in control of everything. But now it looks like his girlfriend is the one who's in control.
That was going to be my question, but did you ever try to talk to Bill himself? Did he ever?
No, when I arranged these interviews with the Patriots, they said to me, you can talk to former players, but you can't talk to current coaches or players because there's too many demands on their time. And I can't say to them, go to this charity event this day and go here this other day, and then talk to this author who wants to talk to you. So, no, I did not get a chance to talk to Belichick.
Well, thank you very much, Vin. I like to think that was terribly entertaining. And I have not heard this talk before, even though Vin and I have known each other for 55, however many years. And he's always typically giving the talk up in New England. And there have been a couple of times when we've either been within a day or two of being able to see it. So this was really a first for me. Some of the stories I have heard, and one of my favorites, and I wanted him to tell it, was about the big flush, or the royal flush, as I would call it. You can only imagine. I think even some of the board members, were they not, were on that? The Patriot board members or something?
Yeah.
Board members of the team were actually called in to help with the flush. So this was a very democratic flush, everybody. So, but thank you so very much. We enjoyed it. And now we have some recognition for you. As all of you know, those who give a presentation to the Old Guard receive this certificate. And as you'll notice on the certificate is an orchid. And the orchid is a symbol of the Summit Old Guard because apparently many, many years ago, back in the 30s, Summit was known as the orchid capital either of the states or of the eastern part of the country, not quite sure, but a major orchid provider. So in honor of your presence here, we give you this certificate of appreciation. And our second manner of acknowledging is the Old Guard salute. And lastly, I would encourage you, the books are available on Amazon. Get the book because you'll find much more detail in the books and they're terribly good reading.